The Zambezi is Africa's fourth largest river system, and its basin encompasses some 540,000 square miles. From its source in a sodden marsh in Zambia, the river flows eastwards for 2,200 miles to its delta, before finally draining into the Indian Ocean. The world-famous Victoria Falls is the river's most prominent landmark and defines the boundary of the upper section of the river. Within the middle Zambezi region lies the ancestral lands of the Tonga people. For centuries, the forbidding escarpments rising from the banks of the Zambezi River, the deadly tsetse fly and the scorching heat isolated the Tonga from the outside world. The river was not just a lifeline, but an integral part of the Tonga cultural, spiritual and social life. They referred to themselves as Basalwezi, the river people. Villages were located along the banks of the river and around the mouths of tributaries. The annual flooding of the Zambezi deposited alluvial soils and fertilized their riverine fields. The tsetse fly infestation of the 1830s and the rinderpest epidemic of the 1890s decimated cattle numbers, forcing the Tonga to become more reliant on goats, sheep and chickens. The copper mines of northern Zambia were developing rapidly between 1920 and 1945 due to strong worldwide demand and favorable prices. This, coupled with the brisk growth of the manufacturing sector in Zimbabwe, necessitated a cheap and secure source of electric power. With the perennial Zambezi River forming the boundary between the two countries, hydroelectric power was the obvious solution. Construction of the dam wall began in 1956, but two floods in 1957 and 1958 hampered its progress. The Tonga people believed that the floods were the work of their river god, Nyami Nyami, who would never allow the taming of the Zambezi. But in 1959, the construction of the dam wall was finally completed. It was estimated that around 30,000 Tonga people would have to be relocated from the floor of the new dam. Understandably, the Tonga were extremely unhappy about leaving their ancestral lands, and to make matters worse, the relocation program was badly managed by the authorities. The budget for the operation was set at £4 million, but the actual number of people to be resettled had been seriously miscalculated. The numbers were closer to 57,000 than 30,000. Cynically, the budget remained unchanged and insufficient arable land was available. The Tonga were unceremoniously bundled into the back of open trucks, forced to carry with them what they could before being offloaded in unknown territory. Their cattle were herded long distances on the hoof, with many dying along the way. Relocation took place on both sides of the Zambezi, and the physical separation by the new lake split the Tonga people in two. The environment of the resettlement areas was inhospitable. Instead of a fertile floodplain with plentiful water, the Tonga were now faced with hand-tilling poor soils in a highly erratic rainfall area. While £4 million was set aside for the resettlement of the Tonga people, a much larger sum was raised from local and international sources concerned with the plight of wild animals in the face of the rising lake.
Here is a challenge to the rangers. It is their valley that is threatened, their animals. To do nothing to help would be unthinkable. They set about the job of saving hundreds of helpless creatures, the job that was nicknamed Operation Noah.
During Operation Noah, 5,274 animals were captured. A net total of 4,129 were actually saved, nearly 50% of which were the ubiquitous impala. Land was also set aside as national parks for the translocated animals. An evaluation of expenditures between the two operations showed that about £900 was spent per animal, compared to £70 per person. Whilst Operation Noah was in progress, the Department of Veterinary Services, Tsetse and Trypanosomiasis Control was busy with their own agenda. Their mission was to try and eliminate the tsetse fly's host, large wild vertebra upon which the blood-sucking fly depends for food. The tsetse fly carries the trypanosoma parasite, which causes sleeping sickness in humans and nagana in domestic animals, particularly cattle. Much of the country was being opened up for cattle ranching, and so eliminating the threat of the disease was key. Between 1933 and 1958, over 148,000 wild animals from 36 different species were shot, including 208 black rhino. In 1959, the strategy moved away from wildlife annihilation towards the destruction of tsetse fly habitat and the use of insecticides and traps. These contrary administration agendas of forced resettlement, Operation Noah, and the tsetse fly eradication program, combined with the ever-present danger of human-wildlife conflict, hardened the Tonga people's attitude towards wildlife and conservation. This deep-seated collective psyche, which permeated across generations, would have to be addressed if wildlife was to endure. A Transfrontier conservation area is defined as a component of a larger ecological region that straddles the boundaries of two or more countries, encompassing one or more protected areas, as well as multiple resource use zones. The Kavango-Zambezi Transfrontier Conservation Area, KAZA, lies in the Kavango and Zambezi river basins, where Angola, Botswana, Namibia, Zambia and Zimbabwe converge and covers some 200,000 square miles. The goal of KAZA is to sustainably manage the Kavango-Zambezi ecosystem, its heritage and cultural resources based on best conservation and tourism models for the socio-economic well-being of the region's communities. Safari hunting is an integral part of this strategy. KAZA has had many teething problems, and there are accusations of it being a paper park, that is, having no real significance. But KAZA's principles are worth persevering with, and there are success stories within its boundaries. The Zimbabwe component of KAZA comprises 14% of the total range, and within this area lies the Hwangi Sanyati Biodiversity Corridor Project, 14 million acres in extent. The $6.4 million project has been funded by the Global Environment Facility. Other organizations involved with the scheme include the World Bank, WWF, the Zimbabwean Environmental Ministry, and other local conservation agencies. The objectives of the project are to address numerous challenges within the area, including inadequate water supplies for wildlife, destructive wildfires, wildlife and timber poaching, human-wildlife conflicts, land degradation, limited livelihood options, and food insecurity. Securing wildlife populations and their habitat can help reverse land degradation. The sustainable use of stable game populations can help improve the livelihood options of local communities. Campfire is the acronym for Communal Areas Management Program for Indigenous Resources and is a strategy devised to satisfy the needs of rural communities whilst conserving the environment.
Campfire is the earliest of all known community-based natural resources management programs in Southern Africa. The idea here being to link the conservation of natural resources to the economic development of various communities. These are communities that are rural, that survive on agricultural practices and mostly subsistence because of the nature of rainfall and soils in those areas. Campfire protects upwards of 3 million hectares of land.
Safari hunting is the best wildlife use option in communal areas. Game populations are generally too low to support photographic safari operations, but high enough to sustain controlled hunting. The bulk of the safari hunting opportunities in communal lands is for dangerous game, the majority of which are considered problem animals, that is, crop raiders such as elephant and livestock-killing predators. Around 90% of Campfire revenue comes from hunting. Elephant hunting contributes more than 70% of the annual revenue. Historically, the overwhelming majority of elephant safari hunters came from the United States. But in April 2014, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service announced a suspension on the importation of sport-hunted African elephant trophies taken in Tanzania and Zimbabwe. The decision was taken without any prior warning. Neither country was consulted beforehand, nor was the safari hunting community. The reasons given for the suspension included questionable management practices, a lack of effective law enforcement, and weak governance. In the case of Zimbabwe, the service, by their own admission, used limited, unsubstantiated data as indicating a significant decline in the elephant population. A subsequent elephant census and management plan showed that elephant numbers in Zimbabwe continue to climb. Every year since 2014, rural communities throughout Zimbabwe have lost significant vital revenue because of the ivory importation suspension, which remains in place.
In terms of numbers, communities that receive benefits directly or indirectly from the Campfire program constitute about 25% of the population, around 800,000.
With the elimination of 70% of their income, Campfire communities across Zimbabwe have had to look for alternatives. The Hwange communal area lies within the Hwange-Sanyati biodiversity corridor. It is a part of the country's Campfire project and includes the Sidinda ward, which borders the Zambezi River. This area forms part of the ancestral lands of the Tonga people.
The community in Sidinda is plus or minus 580 households, which is a small enough community that can then be used as the basis of sustainable wildlife utilization in all its forms, consumptive and non-consumptive.
Mbala Bala Safaris is the hunting outfitter operating in this area. The company is owned and run by Lyndon Stanton and Tinny Cock. When they took over the hunting area in 2014, they realized that certain key species would have to be reintroduced in order to improve the viability of the area. The idea of restocking the area with wildlife was presented to the Hwange Rural District Council, who were very supportive.
We went to the council, had a meeting with them and gave them our proposal, and they were absolutely unbelievably keen to do it. And in return they contacted the Zimbabwe Campfire, headed by Charles Jonga. He contacted us and we all gathered up and had a chat, and they got the ball rolling, found some funding, and they said to us, what would we be keen to do? So we said to them, well, we want a certain area within the concession that we'd want to fence off and make it our core reintroduction area. The long-term vision is to largen the area to 100,000 acres, which will be fenced, a buffalo fence, so the buffalo can't mix with the cattle or anything.
Once the population levels of the various reintroduced species stabilized, a controlled trophy animal quota would be put in place. The success of the plan would hinge on the local people realizing tangible benefits from the project. This would come in the form of cash from trophy fees and meat from the hunted animals. The Rural Council undertook a public relations exercise across the region to inform the various communities about the proposed scheme.
We had a whole program of the communities themselves sitting down and drawing out the area that they believed and agreed was their wildlife area.
We want this area to be good, to be full of animals. We don't want poaching anymore. And then we don't want somebody to be getting to run with these animals, poaching, put some snails. So we want these animals 5 years' time to be more than, and then they will help us.
We chatted to Zimbabwe National Parks and Wildlife Management, and they sent out an ecologist to come and do an assessment of the area. They did an assessment, had a look around, and they came to us with the numbers and said, right, you guys can run 100 buffalo here, put 30 sable in, 30 zebra, 30 eland, 30 waterbuck, 50 bushbuck,
Here we have a public-private community partnership that will see the communities taking center stage in the management of their wildlife area in partnership with an existing private sector partner. The local authority is basically playing a supportive role in the management of that wildlife enterprise.
With financial support from their safari hunting clients, Lyndon and Tinny hired 40 people from the local community and began erecting the fence.
What we've done here is we've fenced up against the Zambezi, so the northern boundary is the fence, and then we've fenced it into almost a D on the river there. We had quite a few issues to begin with. It's a fairly difficult country to build this fence, particularly this side. There's a lot of hills here. There's not a road that comes along this side of the fence, so we actually had to build everything by hand. We had to carry all the sand and the water. We dug all the holes by hand. There was no machines used. We've concreted each of these poles into the ground there, so we did that all by hand.
One of the challenges we had here was with these palms coming down, it actually washed the fence away in the early stages of the year. So we decided to bring it here where we can control what comes through. One thing you'll notice here is electrification of the fence. Is the height of the middle wire is the same height as a buffalo's nose. So when he walking along, if he ever challenges the fence, it'll just give him a little zap on the nose, and he'll back off and walk away. And then the top strand here, we put this up for the elephant, to keep the elephant out. Because the last thing we want is them coming through here and ripping the whole fence down. They're bloody destructive, and as much as we want them in the area, we're trying to keep them out of the initial area that we've fenced. Yeah, we've got the three strands on the fence, and it runs pretty much 13 or 14 kilometers from the Zambezi right round to the Matesi River. We were going to run this on a generator, but the cost was just too much. So the guys who helped us with the fence said, why don't you put in this solar panel? And it pushes quite a hectic voltage out. So it shoots down every 3 seconds. You can actually hear it ticking. Every time it shoots out a pulse. Shoots down, comes back, and then bounces back onto the other area.
So as time goes on, we'll add another strand in the middle here, one on the outside on the top, and one halfway down on the side, just for the cattle. The cattle do come up and down the fence, and they damage it. So we would like to try and keep those cattle out.
I last to see some buffaloes here. I think it was 1997.
Whilst the fence was being erected, Lyndon and Tinny located a potential source of buffalo. A fenced area of the Victoria Falls National Park had an overpopulation of buffalo, and at least 100 needed to be removed as overgrazing had become a problem. A deal was made between Campfire, Hwangi Rural District Council, and the National Parks authorities to move 100 buffalo from the park to Sidinda. Before the buffalo could be brought in, a holding boma and offloading ramp had to be built within the core area. This was necessary in order for the animals to become acclimatized to their new environment and to prevent fragmenting of the group. It would also make it easier to provide supplementary food and fresh water and administer any necessary veterinarian treatment. The African Wildlife Management and Conservation Capture Unit, led by Nick Lagrange, was commissioned to capture and translocate the buffalo. A boma in the shape of a large funnel was constructed with plastic sheeting prior to the start of the capture. The well-camouflaged entrance, 100 yards wide, was positioned to face into the wind so that the human scent of the capture team wouldn't scare off the animals. When everything was in place, the chopper took off to go in search of the buffalo. Once located, the animals were slowly herded towards the tunnel entrance. The success of such an operation relies on the strength and direction of the wind, the experience of the chopper pilot, and effective communication between the pilot and the ground team. As the animals approached the entrance of the funnel, they were swiftly chased into the boma with the vehicle. Once inside the boma, the ground team systematically closed the curtains behind the buffalo. The animals view the plastic sheeting as a solid wall and won't try to go through it. Instead, they will continue down the funnel. The buffalo were slowly pushed into a narrowing chute leading to a ramp and the waiting transport truck before being driven to their final destination.
We didn't lose a single animal, which shows the professionalism of the unit. They sat in the boma here for about a month or so. When we released them, we weren't too sure what was going to happen. But yeah, they seem to have adapted really well. One of the things with these buffalo was we didn't realize the expense to look after them. You know, it's costing us quite a large amount on a daily basis. When you're in a dry area and a drought area like this, you've got to help supplement through the year. We brought in 30 tons of feed last week, and that'll be done in the next sort of 2 weeks. As you can see though, it's definitely worth it. We wouldn't be where we are now without the funding of a lot of our clients. And that's just through booking a safari through with us. A project like this is not easy to fund. We will have a small cropping quota, 4 or 5 animals a year, just to try and pay for the anti-poaching and the maintenance and the upkeep of the area. It's not just about the wildlife, it's about the environment as well. The good thing about where we are right now is everybody wants to see it succeed. The community is behind us, the local district council is behind us, Campfire is behind us, which for us is key. Without the community involved, it's not going to happen. You have to have them involved. We've got a couple of guys here, skinners, trackers. They all go back to their homes. You know, might meet up at a church or something like that, and everybody says, "Hey, what's happening down there in that wildlife area?" They say to everybody straight away, "Geez, you won't believe it. For the first time in 25 years, we walked past buffalo today, feeding in the river." With that, word spreads, and as soon as people start benefiting from it, the word spreads even more, and more people are now going to say, "Well, you know, how about doing something like that in our area?"
We are very happy with this campaign because now our area will be very good.
One of the issues with establishing a reserve in a wildlife-depleted area is that it effectively becomes an oasis. The game is concentrated in a relatively small, contained area, and this attracts the attention of poachers. Having a neighboring country on its northern border makes the problem even greater in Sidinda. It is very easy for the poachers to escape across the Zambezi River with the knowledge that there can be no hot pursuit by the Zimbabwean authorities. The Hwangi Rural District Council has trained 14 game scouts to take on anti-poaching work in the Sidinda area. Working alongside the General Manager, Dean Peel, regular patrols are conducted by boat, vehicle and on foot. The illegal netting of fish in the Zambezi River is a perennial problem, and the only way to try and control it is through regular patrolling and the removal and destruction of any nets found.
I just want you to walk up the Zambezi River, just checking for snares on the side in the river line there, and then back up and around to behind the bomas to the gate side. Okay. If you see anything, just let me know. Call me on the radio.
Nixon.
Yeah, Nixon, go ahead.
Yeah, we'll find some snails here along the river. Snails for catch the buffalo.
Okay, copy that. I'll come and have a look now. The buffalo will drink down towards the Zambezi here, and they'll feed back through this riverine area. As you can see, there's fresh dung and tracks along here. So here at Sidinda, these copper wire snares are our biggest problem. They're made from the old telephone wires, and they're extremely strong. We found these 3 here this morning in this thick riverine area. These snares are very strong. They don't often break, but where they've tied it to the tree often comes undone. A buffalo with a snare on it can be pretty dangerous. We've brought these buffalo back into the area, so we're going to need to really get on top of this anti-poaching. I think Zambians will be one of our biggest problems. There's a lot of hills on the river, and we've got strategic places that we will place guys that you can see all the way from one side of the fence to the next OP point, and then all the way up to our corner here.
The introduction of armed game scouts into the area has had an additional benefit for the local people.
Those Zambians, they come from Zambia with some boats. Then they cross the river, come to our area from our area with some AKs, guns, and then they take our cows with a force to going to Zambia. So now we got some scouts in our area. They can't cross to come here because they know that there is some scouts. When our scouts saw them, they will be arrested because we got some scouts. There's no one who can come from Zambia to take our cows now. So we are very happy with those things.
One of the problems associated with hunting concession leases in many parts of Africa is the length of tenure. Safari operators are reluctant to invest time and money into an area only to lose it to another outfitter after a few years.
When we came in here, we said to the council, we said, look, 5 years, we put all the hard work in, we're only going to start sort of seeing the benefits of successful anti-poaching and so on after sort of 7-8 years. Nobody wants to put something into an area for 5 years and then year 6 they lose it to somebody else who's just going to come in and wipe out all the hard work that they've done over the 5 years. So we said to them, this 5-year thing, we need to do away with it. They came back and they said, okay, no, that makes sense. What would you like to do? So we said, well, let's do a 15 to 20-year lease. Every 5 years we have a meeting, sit down, and whatever we want to talk about within the contract, we can, change a few things and so on, but give us a long-term lease.
The long-term perspective for this investment is that you have a community that becomes a shareholder in the business. And we believe this could be the beginning of a dedicated program of community conservancy that then can be used as a template for the development of similar initiatives in the future. As a result of the establishment of the Sidinda Conservancy, we have now seen similar initiatives taking shape, and to date we have another 6 similar investments that will be carried out in the lower Zambezi Valley.
This region has had a turbulent history. Progress is perhaps inevitable, but it can't be at any cost. It is lunacy to expect a nation of people to willingly embrace wildlife conservation after being forced from their ancestral lands, and when the outside world considers the life of a wild animal of greater value than their own. This is the crux of the matter in African wildlife conservation. If rural African communities are not allowed to decide if and how the wildlife resource is utilized, then there is zero incentive to protect it. The international wildlife conservation agencies, both governmental and non-governmental, have got it wrong. The ban on the legal trade of wildlife products and the political flip-flopping around the importation of safari-hunted animals is destroying both the wildlife and habitat that they profess to be protecting. Animal activist groups have no right to dictate to the people of Africa on how to manage their wildlife. If inspirational ventures such as the Sidinda Wildlife Rehabilitation Project are not unreservedly supported, the future of African wildlife conservation will be very bleak indeed.
In 20 years' time, I want to be here and see a herd of 500 buffalo. I'll see herds of 40, 50 sable. That is where we're going, and we want to see that flourish. We look across the river at Zambia. I used to work here with the previous operator. I have not seen a single animal there in 30 years. I want those guys to look across at our side and say, wow, how did that happen?